Hi friends, Father Carey here, and this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one about an ancient argument for the existence of God, which anticipates and influences later Christian theological arguments for the existence of God. The argument comes from Plato, the Athenian philosopher who dies around 323 BC. Plato's influence, as I'm sure you know, has been enormous. The 20th century philosopher Alfred North Whitehead famously said that all Western philosophy is but a footnote to Plato. I used to doubt that, but I tell you what, the older I become, the more I think that Whitehead is absolutely correct. Now, in his final and longest dialogue, entitled The Laws, Plato offers us, in Book 10 of that dialogue, his argument for the existence of God. And in so doing, he invents, as the Roman author Varro says, natural theology. There are two ways of doing theology in the Christian tradition. One is the natural theological way, and the other is the revealed theological way. Very briefly, when one does revealed theology, what one does is to rely upon revelation that is beyond the reach of reason in order to discover things about God. But if one does natural theology, one employs reason and philosophy to work towards information about God. Obviously, as a pre-Christian Greek, Plato isn't interested or even cognizant of what we call revealed theology, but he invents natural theology. It's really intriguing. So, in Book 10 of the Laws, Plato wants to respond to three different groups of people. He wants to respond to atheists who deny the existence of God. He wants to respond to those people who believe that the gods are indifferent to human welfare because bad things can happen to human beings. And he wants to respond to those people who think that they can bribe gods in order to win their support or at least their indifference when the people are acting badly. Plato says that of the three, the first is the least harmful, the second is the second harmful, but the third, those people who think they can manipulate gods by bribing them, are the worst. And he wants to respond to each of them point by point by point. So, do gods exist in response to atheists? Plato wants to say yes, and his argument, although very complicated, basically boils down to a consideration of the cause of change or motion in the universe. Plato wants to argue that there are 10 different kinds of motion, what he calls in the Greek kinesis, but that really two need concern us most here. One kind of motion is that which is generated by earlier motion, and another kind of motion is that which is self-generated. There has to be, Plato seems to assume, a starting point for all of the motion or change or causation, if you want to really stretch the point, that you and I observe in the world. We know that inanimate objects cannot move or change themselves, so there must be some kind of a force that is moving them, that is not inanimate, that is not material. And Plato calls this force psyche, which is translated as soul or spirit, but which he seems to be using as a synonym for God. So according to Plato, there has to be an original or source or agent of change, which is not itself the effect of any prior agent or source of change, which changes, which moves everything else that is movable. That includes not only living beings like you and me and caterpillars and aardvarks, but it also includes the celestial spheres that move in the heavens. So there has to be something that is the first cause of change, if you will, and Plato is content to think of that soul as God. But of course, this is where Plato gets really interesting to my mind. That soul, that overarching soul, which is intelligent enough to design all motion and change, also somehow must reside in us, because we, physical material bodies, are also moved, right? We are animated inanimate bodies, so to speak. And so what Plato seems to be suggesting, I'm not quite clear on this, and I don't think he is either, But what he seems to be suggesting is that the overall soul that changes, moves, creates everything that is by its original primary movement somehow is inside of us as well. If that is what he's saying, then Plato seems to be defending what today would be called panpsychism. It's not that God is everything, but that God is in everything, that somehow God's animating spirit is in everything that moves. How do you know that? Because it moves, Plato would say. This argument, broken into at least two other arguments, is to be found in Thomas Aquinas's 13th century Summa Theologiae, when Thomas offers us 5 arguments for the existence of God, one from motion and one from change. So clearly, Plato's invention of natural theology has been influential in the Christian West. So much for the first response to people who don't believe in God. Now, what about the second class of people who do believe in God, but believe that God or the gods are indifferent to human fate? Because bad things happen to good people. Plato has several arguments in response to this, but the one that I think is most interesting is one that will be actually kind of adopted in the 17th century by the philosopher Wilhelm Leibniz with his The Best of All Possible Worlds thesis. Leibniz argues that a good and all-powerful God had many different kinds of worlds to choose from when he was contemplating creating everything that is. And because God is all good and all-powerful, God selects the very best of all of those possibilities. Plato seems to be suggesting something very much like that. This is the best of all possible worlds created by the overarching soul or God, because that overarching soul or God is not only purely rational, but it's also purely good. For Plato, rationality and goodness always go hand in hand. A diminution of goodness always means, for Plato, a diminution of reasoning. If bad things appear to happen to us in this best of all possible worlds, Plato, like Leibniz, will say, it's because we can't take a God's eye perspective on what's going on. God is concerned, suke, soul, is concerned for Plato in creating the most harmonious and the most virtuous overall system that is possible. And sometimes that may mean that individuals within that system come out not exactly happy. Let me read you what Plato has to say here. It's really quite interesting, and it's beautifully put. All coming to be occurs for the sake of this, in order that a happy existence might accrue to the life of the universe. Not coming to be for your sake, but you for its sake. For every doctor and every skilled craftsman does everything for the sake of the whole. He makes a part that contributes to what is best in common, for the sake of the whole, and not the whole for the sake of a part. But you are displeased because you don't understand how what is best for the whole, where you are concerned, turns out to be best for you also, thanks to the power of the common coming to be. So even though your own particular circumstances may not seem ultimately desirable, or at least maximally desirable, they truly are, according to Plato, because suke, soul, God, has preordained, if you will, an order and a rationality to the universe which ultimately really is in your best interest. Okay, those are the first two objections that Plato wants to respond to. What about the third, and so far as he's concerned, the worst, that the gods can be bribed? That you and I can lead lives that are wicked and evil. And as long as we offer propitiations to the gods, as long as we offer sacrifices to the gods, maybe throw a little money at the church, we'll be okay. Plato makes short shrift of this particular objection. He's really quite disdainful of it. You can read the contempt in his words in the Laws. He wants to say, if you presume this, then what you are presuming is that you are more powerful and more virtuous than the gods, than the overarching soul. because you, a wicked person, can so easily manipulate the god or the gods by bribing. You are like coyotes that attack a starving wolf and thereby bend the wolf to your will. In what possible world, Plato asks us, can you think that of a God which I, Plato, have already argued, to my satisfaction at any rate, Plato says, is all rational and all good and has ordained a universe which is maximally good and rational? So, what Plato has done here is to anticipate so many later Christian theological arguments about the existence of God and the nature of God. Once again, he obviously is not a Christian, but we can see that Alfred North Whitehead's dictum that all of Western philosophy is but a footnote to Plato might also be expressed. All of Western theology is but a footnote to Plato. I really do encourage you, my friends, to get yourself a copy of Plato's Laws, turn to Book 10, and read it slowly and carefully. Plato's not an easy read, I grant you that, but oh my goodness, is he a rewarding read. And there's something so wonderful, to my mind at any rate, about recognizing that our great Christian tradition has deep, deep roots in Greek philosophy. Friends, I'm Father Carey, and this has been another Holy Spirit moment. Thank you so much for viewing. If you are of a mind, I do invite you to subscribe. At any rate, I'll see you again real soon. Take care. God bless.